Since I've been asked this many times now, I'll give you a quick rundown of my steering wheel and force feedback settings for Assetto Corsa Rally today. I'm using the Fanatec CSL DD 5Nm wheelbase, but I try to explain the settings in a way that it is hopefully more broadly applicable to other bases. We'll go through the wheelbase settings as well as the in-game ones, and I'll show you some additional stuff that is a little bit hidden at the moment. Let's go! Wheelbase settings first, and starting off with sensitivity, which is the angle of rotation, I've set to 1440 degrees. I'll talk about this one again once we get to the in-game settings. It will make more sense then. Force feedback strength is at 100%, so maximum, and force feedback scale on peak. This is just to get the maximum amount of force feedback out of my small 5Nm wheelbase. Natural damper, friction, and inertia all work in conjunction and somewhat in a similar way as well. All of them make the steering wheel a little bit heavier, introducing resistance in a couple of different ways, and can all be very helpful to prevent oscillations. I found though that going too high on any of these settings would make the force feedback of Assetto Corsa Rally, which already isn't all that detailed, even less so. Which is why I have settled for 5%, 10% and 5% respectively. The interpolation filter is a setting to smoothen out the force feedback overall, which can help a lot decreasing noise. But once again, on higher settings you lose a lot of force feedback detail, so I've settled on a setting of 1. Force effect intensity acts in a kind of similar way, with 100 giving the most sharp results. On other games I found this to be very useful if you have rattling, but in Assetto Corsa Rally that really isn't necessary for me. Force, spring and damper effect strength I've just left at default. This just works very well for me across every single sim I play. My brake force at 65%, that really doesn't help you all that much. This is really dependent on what kind of a brake you have and how much braking force you actually want to put in to reach 100% braking in-game. As braking in rallying requires a lot of finesse though, I would recommend setting your brake force high enough so that you do have a lot of room to play with and don't super easily hit 100% braking, because that is something that you usually do not need. Now let's get to the in-game settings. You will find the important ones under Inputs, Force Feedback. Our first setting here, Gain, is I think the most personal setting, because this just sets the overall strength of all force feedback effects. I personally like a little bit of a lighter force feedback feel, which is why I've set this to 85, but what I would recommend is to go on a tarmac stage and set this to a value that you can comfortably drive a full stage without feeling overwhelmed by the force feedback. Why do I say tarmac stage? Well, that's because in Assetto Corsa Rally the force feedback on tarmac is just a lot stronger than on gravel. Which does make sense in a way, though I feel the difference between tarmac and gravel is a little bit too much at the moment. I actually do hope that we will get separate adjustability for those in the future. But one more thing to note for gain is that you can actually increase this above 100 in the settings here, so keep that in mind. The next setting, minimum force, I've set to 0, and I would usually recommend this to everyone, at least if you have a direct drive wheel. But for less powerful wheelbases, and especially belt or gear driven ones, using a little bit of minimum force here could help you out if you're experiencing any issues. The damper is a setting that I've always had at 0 because I never really understood what this actually did. Because contrary to the name, this isn't some constant damping being put on the wheel and just muddling up your force feedback. No, this actually is a setting that in other sims is called dynamic damping. This simulates that at lower speeds you would actually have a harder time turning the wheel than at higher speeds, because the tires just don't have as much friction side to side. And that's why I think the setting is actually quite useful, because it makes the behavior of the car feel more realistic. You can really feel the difference at a standstill. So at the start line, just play with the setting. If you have the damper at 0, then steering at the start line without moving will actually feel pretty light. Too light when compared to actually driving the car at speed. Put this at 100 and you will really feel that when the car is not moving, you will have a hard time turning the wheel at all. But that to me feels a little bit like the power steering isn't working. Which of course could be useful if you're actually trying to simulate the older cars which didn't have power steering. But after a bunch of testing, I've settled on a middle ground of 50 for this setting. This makes the steering at lower speeds noticeably heavier, but not overly so, and at higher speeds you will not notice any difference between having this at 50 or at 0. And that makes it the most overlooked setting in my opinion, also because the name wasn't really chosen all that well. Moving on to the steering lock, which is once again set at 1440, like I did in my wheelbase settings. And that is because this combination gives me the correct steering angle for every single car in the game. No need to change anything when switching between cars. And with wheel soft lock on, you also get the correct soft lock at the appropriate angle of rotation. If you want a more detailed explanation and showcase of this, I've made a separate video on the topic which you can find in the card linked above or in the description down below. And lastly, we have the advanced force feedback gain. Now this is a setting that for my wheelbase doesn't seem to change anything. And that is because I'm pretty sure that this setting is controlling Logitech True Force and Fanatec's Full Force, which are separate force feedback effects or profiles only available for these two manufacturers and also not for every single one of their wheelbases. On my CSL DD there is no full force available yet, which is I'm pretty sure why this slider isn't doing anything for me. But if you do have a compatible wheelbase, then feel free to test with this setting to see if this setting makes the force feedback better and more detailed for you. And that is almost everything, because there is one additional way to adjust force feedback if you feel like you do need different amounts of force feedback on different cars or surfaces. Because what you can do is go to the car setup, navigate to the wheels tab, where in the middle you will find the force feedback multiplier. You can in or decrease this for the car you're driving or even the specific stage, and then just save and load the setup as needed. But that is now actually everything regarding force feedback in Assetto Corsa Rally. If you found this helpful, leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you have any questions or feedback, leave them in the comments down below. Thanks a lot for watching, I've been HD, have an awesome day and see you in the next one.